you. I'm just going to introduce Nanni because he's hosting this talk, and he also has an amazing website if you speak Italian called I 600 Calci.
400 calci.
My Italian is terrible.
No problem. I'll write it down for you if you come and meet me later.
But he has like the #1 Italian action horror website for reviewing, and it's if you can speak Italian, definitely check it out. And he will be talking with Jess Liaudin, who some of you may know, this is not working, some of you may know from UFC and has gone on to professional acting. So I'm going to stop talking now and hope you give them a big round of applause. And there'll be some questions afterwards if you want to ask. Please give them a round of applause.
And you have a lot of them.
I'm not sure if we can tell all the story today, but I'm going to try my best.
Yeah. But it's between us, it's just between us.
You're best friends.
So, well, my first question is, the short Cauliflower was really good and really interesting. It's, does this work better? It's a controversial topic. Does it work?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So just wonder how you've been involved in that project.
Well, the director got in touch with me, and obviously over the past years, occasionally I do short films, but I'm quite picky about the short films I want to do because I had many disappointments in my early career, but now obviously I've got so much time and energy to give. But what interested me was obviously the Cauliflower and talk about fighting, wrestling, grappling, martial art in a different way, in an artistic way. It also for me was a different exercise to do the narration, which obviously is a whole new thing for me. Which initially when I did the narration, the film was much shorter, it was 3 minutes, so I felt that it was a lot more impactful. Now the film is 3 minutes, the impact is not quite the same, but so far the film has been very well received, even from the MMA Jiu-Jitsu community. I mean, Royal Gracie got in touch with the director. They said and they really enjoyed the film, and we didn't even send it to them. They saw it online and stuff like that. So, you can't do better than that as an accomplishment, so we're very happy with it.
Cool. So, let's take it back to the beginning, I guess. And so what I'd like to ask is, right from the start, how do you get involved into martial arts? How did you start it, and how do you find your passion for it?
Well, obviously I'm 50 years old, so back in the 70s when we were a kid, you only had two options, in France anyway. Either you play football or you do judo. Judo is very popular in France, we got a great national team. I tried football, they just say it didn't really work out very well. So I did judo, but I was not much better because I'm not going to get too long into that, but my father used to be very abusive. He used to beat me up a lot. So I was very passive, and obviously when you do judo, you have to grab onto your opponent, you have to try to throw them. When you do rangery, and I couldn't do that. I didn't know how to fight back. So the instructor, he said to my mother, this kid is useless, he doesn't want to fight back. He wants to learn a technique, but when it comes to sparring, he was terrible. So I did that, then after I did a bit of karate, which was better because we didn't do so much sparring. But I really came out of my shell when I was 14 years old because eventually me and my mother ran away from my father, and we lived in the street for a while, we slept in a church. I discovered Thai boxing, that was 1984, and Thai boxing was very popular in a very rough area, and that's where I grew up, what you guys would call a gangster state. And because I didn't have the pressure of my father, now I really came out of my shell, and I really became very passionate about martial art, and that's where my journey really started. And by 16 I started competing.
And you studied a lot of different styles. I've seen it. There is a documentary about Jess on YouTube, which is in French, so that's the fun of today. I have a website in Italian, there's a documentary in French, but anyway, it tells about your story really well and about the fact that you've learned different styles. So how do you become passionate about learning different ways of different styles, which eventually led you to the UFC, basically?
Obviously, it was martial art movies. When I was 14 years old, I got a job in a video store. I'm sure you've heard that story before, Tarantino, to name a few. And I watched tons of movies. And for me, that helped me come out of my shell as well. I discovered the world, literally. And martial art movies, of course. I was like, very passionate by it. And passionate in different style. You know, the same philosophy as Bruce Lee and Jeet Kune Do, as most of you know. So I wanted to train in many different styles. So I did Thai boxing initially, but because I was watching a lot of movies, I would come to practice and do all those kicks that I saw in those movies, which were pretty much taekwondo kick. I would do 360 spinning hook kick, and my instructor was a very traditional Muay Thai instructor. Didn't like none of this. He was like, what is this shit? If you want to do that, go and do kickboxing. And back in the days, kickboxing and Muay Thai were really against each other. MMA was not even around yet. So eventually, I did kickboxing. I did Japanese kickboxing, which wasn't a style. It was a lot more open, where you could include a lot more kicks and techniques and stuff like that. And the reason I started to compete is because I wanted to test my skills. I want to learn new stuff and go in combat and see if it works. I never wanted to become a professional fighter. That literally happened by accident. You do one fight, you do two fights, but really my passion is I always wanted to make movies. But you didn't know how. You know, you don't come from that social class, you don't understand. So I would keep fighting, and eventually I was like, you know what, fighting is a bit like theater. You know, you go on stage, I go in the ring, I do some fancy kick, and people applaud and they enjoy what I do. So eventually, I got the bug of fighting just for that simple reason. But my first goal in fighting wasn't to win, it was to entertain the audience, which worked on my favor for a long time because the promoter liked it. It was like, this kid, you know, every time we put him, the crowd goes crazy. But in the long term, I didn't really take the sport very seriously, so I was very gifted. I got away with not training very hard and not being competitive for a long time. But there were a time when now you are an opponent who are a professional fighter who train really hard and really wanted to win. And now my career started to be a little bit dodgy. Until I was like, you know what, fuck it, let's try very hard, train very hard, and I beat up a bunch of people for an UFC, beat up more people, and that's about it really.
So I guess my question is, was maybe your favorite actors back when you were working on the video store and you were dreaming about becoming an actor yourself? Who inspired you?
Well, there's three guys. One, I'm sure none of you is going to be surprised, is going to be Bruce Lee. One that most of you don't know who he is. There's a French actor called Jean-Paul Belmondo, who was initially a dramatic actor. He was in Abu de Souffle, if some of you are into cinema, have seen it. And then he eventually did a lot of action movie. He was doing his own stunts, which was very new back in the 60s and 70s. And obviously Gary Oldman, which I think a lot of actors are inspired by good old Gary. So those three actors were a huge influence for me.
Probably a name I kind of respected. I mean, you entered the martial arts world when UFC has basically just started, so it was a new thing, and you managed to see the whole thing, so growing up from UFC to the mixed martial arts world that we're in now, basically. And they usually inspired by Jean-Claude Van Damme. They usually come from Bloodsport, so that was kind of the name I was expecting. But I'm kind of interested also in how you live this new wave of trying to do what Van Damme was doing in Bloodsport, and how they make it into real sport. How did you live that experience?
Well, I remember I saw the first UFC back in 1993. I was fighting in Houston, Texas, in kickboxing on the 21st of November, and 2 weeks earlier they had a UFC. So, as I said, I was a bit flashy, so I went to Houston, beat up the guy with some spinning kick. Everybody was excited, so everybody came to talk to me, especially that I was French. And they said, have you ever heard this thing called UFC? I was like, no, what is that? And they had a VHS tape, for some of you who knows what it is, and they showed it to me. I was like, this is interesting, but I wasn't sure if it was real or not. This was so new at the time that I thought maybe that stage, and also the fight wasn't what we would expect, you know, with all the grappling, so on and so forth. But I came back in Europe and started training grappling. I tried to find judo player, traditional jiu-jitsu player, and initiate myself in grappling. And when I moved to the US in '95, I started competing in MMA. Now, at the time, they didn't have so many promotion, and a lot of the fights were pretty much on the ground in a dojo when you would have a capoeira and kung fu practitioner and stuff like that. So that's how I started. And then I moved in the UK in '96, and that's where the MMA really started here. And when I'm saying started, there are 2 shows a year. And then amateur show when you are like professional amateurs. I remember going to competition when you're a kung fu practitioner, You had kickboxer here, you had, I remember that, and you had 2 weight class, above 90 kilo and under 90 kilo.
Yeah.
So it's funny because I remember one thing that this group of kung fu practitioners, and they remind me of the old 70s movie, and they were all Afro-British with dreadlocks and all wearing this very Chinese uniform. And it's about 7 of them, but they only had one grown guard, which they would borrow to each other and put over the gi, which I thought was hilarious. Yeah, those brothers didn't make you proud. But yeah, that was the early days of MMA here, and then I kept fighting and stuff, and then we had the first professional show in 2000. Cage Rage came around. For people who don't know Cage Rage, that was the first big MMA show here in the UK. I fought in the second event. In between, I lived in Japan and stuff, but yeah, pretty much that's the answer.
So I think we have slightly less time than we thought, and we're already opening to the public. What I'm going to suggest is, you've seen the reels, he can act, he's been in a lot of movies, he's been in mainstream movies, indie movies, so he has a lot of stories. So you have a wide range of things to ask for. And
we've got time for 2 audience questions. If anyone wants to ask anything, put your hand up, and Claire will bring a microphone. But just 2 questions. Anyone? Oh, one here.
Okay. Hi Jess, welcome to Fighting Spirit. Just a quick question really. When any martial artist, should we swap?
Sorry.
Is that better?
Yeah.
When any martial artist or MMA veteran goes into movies, they're almost always typecast as villains or henchmen. Now, in third time lucky. Yeah, so they're almost always typecast as villains or henchmen. From looking at the show reel, you seem to revel in being the bad guy, but also you've got quite a range of performances there. You're not just the heavy. How did you manage to overcome that stereotype?
Because I was hiding the fact that I was doing MMA. I know when I would show up in casting, they said, "What the fuck is that face?" But that wasn't in my resume. I would not put it. Usually people put in big martial art, black belt, this and that. I would not put nothing because I wanted to audition as an actor. So I really pushed myself as an actor. I never called myself an action actor. So I'm trying to stay away from it. It's only later on that I started doing stunts. I remember I was getting very frustrated with my career. But that time I did a film with Donnie Yen, which I fought as an actor, and then my career wasn't going nowhere as an actor. You know, I got cast in Maleficent 2, did an audition with dialogue, and I was there. I was used as an extra. I was that. And then all the stunt guy remember me. He said, "Hey Jess, how's it going?" And the stunt guy started using me to do different things and stunts, and I was like, you know what? Okay, I'm gonna start doing stunts sometime. And then that opened so many new doors because when I started working as a performer, it would say, "Hey, Jess can act." It's like, "Yeah, sure, we heard that one before. A stuntman that can act." But you know what? When I do my self-tape, they think, "Oh, this guy can do it." So, and I opened many doors. That scene I've got with Vincent Cassel there, initially there was no dialogue. I was just supposed to have a fight with him. Vincent Cassel show up, he's like, my character would never beat him up. So they kind of, okay, what are we going to do? The director, like me, Stephen Adkins, Predator 2, for people who know. And he's like, oh, he's got a good look. And I end up having the dialogue of another actors who was supposed to be there. So, you know, I think it's about your skills. I've seen many MMA fighters that move into movies, and some of them are good actors. I'm thinking about Oleg Jakovenko, for example, who was a good actor. But a lot of them, they don't really work on this skill. They just pretty much play themselves. I'm not going to say any name because I don't want to be rude, but you see them in interview or you see them on screen, it's the same. And they've got a natural presence because when you're fighting, you got a microphone in your face all the time. So, but they don't really do acting. You don't even know if they're passionate by it. Me, I'm passionate about acting. You know, I don't like looking at myself, but I like to act. So I wanted to be taken seriously about it. So yeah, I'm still fighting to try to not be the AV. And you'd be surprised. I mean, I refuse a lot of stuff. You know, sometimes they say, "Oh, we want you to be henchman number 2." I'm like, nah, that's not happening. So sometimes you got to, you know, you need to make some money. So sometimes you do a fight scene. Right now I'm doing a film for Netflix. It's a comedy. So I do have a fight scene, but the fight is kind of comedy-ish. So I'm like, okay, that's interesting. But if you want me to be another AV, I remember when I did one shot with Scott, he contacted me to work on another thing with him. I think it was Action Man. I wasn't sure if I wanted to do another action movie like that. I think after that I wanted to do something different and then go back to action movies. So also it's about making the right choice. And sometimes you're gonna say no to work, and it's very difficult, especially when you nobody like me and you're already 50 years old. But you got to do what you got to do. So I hope that answers your question.
It certainly does. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. We are running really short of time now, unfortunately, but Jess is around if anyone wants to talk to him. That's all right.
Yep.